Perfect. So welcome to a special edition of our Physique Educational Series, as we brought along our partners today, GB Hockey, along with the medical team and Brendan Creed. As always, we want you, the viewers, to gain an insight into the professional sporting world, and specifically in this episode, what therapists or physios, healthcare practitioners can do to help support players through a long-term injury. So joining us today, we have a 74-time capped international for England and GB Hockey, Brendan Creed, Matthew Davies, England and GB Hockey physiotherapist, and previously professional rugby and football with some work in private practice as well. And we might have Sophie Weaver, who's England GB physiotherapist, join us in a little while as well. So just a huge thank you for you both for giving up your time. I'm sure everybody viewing this is going to have a great fun listening to what you've got to say and some of the activities you got up to during your rehab as well. So the plan that we're going to go through today is kind of draw a bit of a roadmap of a road to recovery, and pick up some of the key topics throughout the journey, such as motivation, the Olympics, lockdown, the support from the medical team, family, friends, and mental health and everything in between. So Brendan, do you just want to explain the injury, where you're at with your career prior to the injury, and just paint a picture for the viewers to show what happened?
Yeah, I can do. So it was October 2019. We were out at the European Club Championships, and with about 9-10 months to go to the Olympics, I ruptured my ACL and tore part of my calf as well in the process. So yeah, that's probably the easiest way to paint the picture.
Yeah. And was it so ACL, and was that where did your knee dislocate as well during that?
Yeah, so basically my knee dislocated, but it popped straight back in, and there was no meniscus or any damage to any of the other ligaments in the knee. It was literally just anterior cruciate, which was pretty lucky in the end.
And was that a fixture based in the UK, or was that abroad?
That was in Barcelona. Ironically, 5 minutes before a player in my team had also ruptured an ACL. So it was a heavy impact, heavy emotional day.
Yes,
Barcelona.
And so, Matthew, were you present at the day at the game of that?
No, he was away with club club service. So yeah, he came back to us a few days later with a pretty swollen knee and a sad look on his face. And yeah, when we first looked at him, like just probably echoing what Brendan just said, we were a little bit worried about the structures around the posterior lateral corner of his knee. But luckily, when the scan came back, yeah, he's just got a low-grade calf injury and, like I say, the isolated ACL injury. But luckily, no condylar injury and no meniscus injury. So a little bit of relief after we got the MRI back.
Yeah. So you travel back from Barcelona, obviously had the assessment with Matthew and the team at GB Hockey. And what were your initial thoughts, Brendan, of the injury? And were you told then the sort of time that it would take to come back and the sort of details around the injury, or what was your sort of thoughts around that time?
I actually left the room to go and throw up. It was more shock than anything else, because previous assumptions were that actually it wasn't as bad as what it was. But then obviously, as you only ever know once you get the results. And from that point, I kind of just wanted to know timeframes. So I just kept asking, is there a chance? And even if there was a slim chance, I was fine. And if there wasn't, then I think my road to recovery would probably have been very different to what it was. So from that point of view, yeah, it was all pretty much, this is the timeframe there is, and this is the timeframe that we think we can fit in. And I think the whole way through the rehab process, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I basically said, if I'm not good to go, then I'm not good to go. It wasn't going to be a rushed rehab to play in the games and then career stop. It was more a case of, I've still got a few years left in the tank. So we didn't really want to risk it all for one game, as weird as that probably does sound. Very much a view long-term as well as short-term.
Yeah, I mean, first question wasn't it? It's like, are we going to be able to get this back in time for the Olympics?
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, lockdown obviously scuppered that plans anyway. But it was always going to be tight, but it was always potentially doable. But yeah, it was. You're right. It was coming down to a few. You had to be ready on a set date. I think maybe mid June-ish. I think you had to play in a couple of games in June to allow you to have enough game time before the holding camp for Tokyo. So it was going to be tight, but yeah, it was definitely decided early, wasn't it? If you weren't right, we weren't gonna force it.
I think it was a 2-week window we had between my return and selection. So I mean, realistically, it would have been incredibly tight and probably naive from my point of view psychologically that I was convincing myself that I was going to go. But at the same time, I don't think if I'd have got myself into that headspace, I wouldn't have gone about the rehab process the same. So from that point of view, I think we had a window and I was determined to hit that window. And if I wasn't good enough or I wasn't ready, then so be it. But I was going to give myself a chance. And
you mentioned there, so you said you went out of the room and threw up. Is that through shock of the Olympics and possibility that isn't now going to be on the cards, or the extent of the injury, or kind of everything in between?
Extent of the injury. I didn't, to be honest, I wasn't really thinking Olympics at that stage. It was more actually what had happened. I'm a bit of a freak injury player, so I don't really have too many muscle injuries as such. But I get like broken bones and joints dislocated, etc., etc. So for me, this was just another one on the line. It just took me a bit by surprise. But after that initial day, I'd say I was pretty good in terms of how I went about the whole process.
So yeah, so you found out on that day, and then what I think a lot of practitioners and stuff are quite wary of is that, I suppose, mourning period where athletes have to digest that information, especially. So was that sort of a week long, a day long? How long did it take you to kind of go from your mindset of the shock and everything to the sort of positive, motivated attitude to get back?
I gave myself about 45 minutes of crying, I'd say, in probably the physio room, which whoever was lucky enough to stumble in would have witnessed. And then post that, it was kind of all go, 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 really. We had scans, we had meetings with the surgeon. So from that point of view, it wasn't so much slow as there was quite a lot going on, which was quite good because it just kept me busy. And then I was still basically, I had to keep my quad and calf, or quad and hamstring as strong as possible prior to the surgery itself. So there was still quite a lot of work to be done on that side of things, which was actually, again, really good. It was kind of just making sure I'm doing the right things to make sure that when the surgery happens, we're in the best place possible to attack the rehab post. Because obviously there's going to be quite a lot of muscle loss, and obviously where the graft's been taken, the hamstring is going to get significantly weaker. So we're trying to get as strong as possible prior to make sure we're good to go from the point of rehab starting.
And so Matthew, just on that, the surgery, just so viewers and stuff can kind of get an understanding of the timeline. So just talk us through the first sort of 6 weeks briefly. So from injury to obviously traveling back and scans and surgery, what does that kind of look like from your side with the player?
Yeah, so once we first saw him post he came back from the trip, so he had a really swollen knee. We basically put him on crutches just to offload it. We obviously, like Brendan mentioned, we got lined up with a consultant for an orthopedic opinion. So we prefer, he was obviously going to go for surgery, so we're just trying to get that in as soon as we can. I can't remember exactly how long that took, but it would definitely a few days. So in that time, we were kind of using cryotherapy, so things like game ready, compression, and just trying to get the knee to settle down as much as we can. And as Brendan mentioned, just trying to minimize muscle loss as much as we could as well. So using like the Compex, so using that passively just to try and keep some kind of muscle stimulation going. And then went for surgery, and then post-surgery. So we usually give it about a 6-week period after surgery. So that just gives the knee, the goal with that initial period post-surgery is just to allow the knee to settle down as much as we can. So we want a really quiet knee by the end of that. So in an ideal world, there'd be no swelling. and good range of movement as well. So the main things you're looking for is the main thing is getting knee extension. So making sure that's really important, obviously, when you're weight bearing through walking and then looking to get back to running. And then decent flexion as well. So we always try to absolute minimum about 90 degrees by the end of that 6 weeks. But luckily with Brendan, he worked really hard and had pretty much full range by the end of that 6 weeks, I would say. There's quite a lot of swearing in the physio room as we're kind of pushing into that, but he worked well with it, yeah.
And then, so obviously that time after surgery, how important is it for you guys as a medical team to understand the player, what they're going through, and do you try and understand the personality of the players, and do you approach it slightly differently in that quite sensitive time with different players?
Yeah, definitely. I think I think big part of being a physio anyway is being able to show empathy and demonstrate that. And you got an athlete here who's 9 months out from the Olympics and is being told he's going to have an ACL surgery. I think you need to be able to be sensitive around that. But yeah, for sure, different athletes will respond differently. I know for sure some people will just be like, yeah, that's fine, the crack on, where others would probably deal with it slightly. Will take, like you talked about, that mourning period may take a little bit longer. We're really lucky at EIS because we've got really good support. So we've got a sports psychologist as well, and we've got performance lifestyle as well, who are absolutely brilliant. And I don't know, maybe Brendan, I think probably found definitely had some conversations with them just to help kind of getting through those early stages and coping strategies and that sort of stuff. So we're really lucky because it takes a little bit of a workload off us from that point of view, but it probably comes back to working as an MDT. And if we know the athlete's particularly struggling, we've got those avenues we can kind of get the players connected to.
Yeah, definitely. And so one thing that we talk about with a lot of people in professional sport is the ability to work with other departments within the club. So the S&C team, as you mentioned there, performance lifestyle. Is it performance lifestyle coach? Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. But other people and communicating like that. So in that period, is there anything that you think for people working in professional sport or aspiring to professional sport, what they can do to work better within teams, into departments, if that makes sense? Is there anything that you guys do that works really well for the players and for yourself? And is that through communication or how's that all work?
Yeah, it's probably doing the basics really well, I think. So I think what we're really good at our department is we have like regular rehab meetings. So we usually have a meeting beginning part of the week and another catch up at the end of the week. So for someone like Brendan, so getting that usually at the rehab meetings, usually S&C, physio, and then we've got access to nutrition, like say sports psych as well if we need as well. So getting goals in, I think, is really important. So even though we can't do a lot, we know we have got some certain goals to work on over that week. So make sure everyone's on board with that, and make sure Brendan's on board with that as well, so we know what we're all aiming for. And I think also identifying issues early, or potential trip ups along the path early, and getting practitioners involved as quick as you can. So, for example, nutrition is probably a good example because they're not necessarily won't be full time. So it's quite easy to kind of slip through the net. So it's probably just making sure you're aware who you've got access to, and just awareness about how they can influence on this player outside of your own scope of practice.
Yeah, perfect. And so 6 weeks. Let's say we're at 6 week mark. We're looking at full range of motion or trying to get as good range of motion as possible after surgery. Then what's the process after that? What did you guys do with Brendan?
Yeah, so at that 6 week mark, like I said, he worked really hard. We got full range of movement. The knee hadn't quite settled completely, so we had a bit of residual swelling on there. So we decided to, we basically he had fairly significant muscle wastage around quads and hamstrings compared to his other side, and calf as well. So we just basically started targeting those muscle groups. So looking at closed chain strengthening exercise in the gym, using the complex a lot as well. Started adding in some like body weight movement patterns, so looking at like squat and split squat, all in a really controlled manner. So what we don't want to do is basically challenge the knee in any rotational patterns in that time, because he's not going to have the muscular control around the knee. But we're just really looking at, starting to look at hypertrophy of the quadriceps, hamstrings and calf muscles. So getting him in a place where really after probably the next 6-week period is in a place to look to start back to impact work and running. So around about 12 weeks, we'd probably look to do that, as long as he's reached the physical kind of capabilities that we'd require for that. So I guess just touching on that, we're looking at, we're really looking again at EIS, because we can got good diagnostics abilities. So we've got access to like the force decks. So we can look at soleus strength and gastrocnemius strength. And we kind of got enough data in our squad to be able to see what Brendan's previous PBs, also a squad average. So we know, for example, if he's got a weak calf, that's going to really have big influences on ACL stability. So if he's got a weak calf, we put him back running too early, we're putting him at a little bit of risk. So we're really building up all those kind of strength gains. So when we do assess him at that 12-week period ready to running, we know he's in a really safe place to be able to start that.
Perfect. And from your perspective, Brendan, so you've had that first 6 weeks, now you're back in the gym. What was that like for you to be able to start doing something different? Were you at that point where, like you say, you're getting frustrated, or were you like just enthusiastic to be able to do the gym work and sort of get back to it?
I guess I was quite excited just because it was doing something again. So there was quite a lot of lying around and basically movements whilst I was just lying on bed. In fact, I think most of the first 6 weeks was Matt doing work more than I was on that front, just to try and mobe the knee as much as we could. And then the next 6 weeks was just a bit of fun, really, just trying to work out what I can and can't do and where we're at. So it was more a case of, as Matt said, getting diagnostics, using the ISO-K machine a lot. That was good fun, I'd say. So from my point of view, it was actually just getting stuff done and kind of just trying to work out how my body's feeling, how the other parts of my body are feeling as well, because obviously there's going to be a bit of time where it's probably going to overcompensate. What does that feel like and everything else? So kind of just me knowing my body as much as possible, because the last thing I want to get to is a place where I think the staff basically think I'm ready and I know my body's not, but I'm going to push through it. I didn't want to get to that stage. I wanted to get to a stage where everything was pretty open and honest between myself and staff members. So I think as Matt said, like having a sports psych, having a lifestyle manager, having a physio and an S&C coach that were pretty much available whenever I'd need them was great. And at the same time, I'm not that person. I'll only use them if I really want to use them as such. So I was quite happy. Whereas obviously with Matt and Roy, who was my RS&C, is basically I spent a lot of time with those two in close proximity and a lot of times with them. So they probably saw me day in, day out, go in a lot of fluctuations in my moods and things like that. So for me, it was great that they were really consistent as a pair. So I didn't know if Matt and Roy, I didn't know if they were having a good day or a bad day. They were the same person throughout the whole process, which helps me as an athlete a lot. And me specifically as well, who's quite an emotional person at times. So as Matt says, there's probably a lot of swearing, linked or not linked, who knows? But I guess from that point of view, the next 6 weeks were actually just quite a lot of fun, just kind of testing everything out. Yeah,
that's a good point, I suppose. And you either, I suppose, feed off the energy, and that comes back to the relationship that you have with the physio. Obviously, yourself and Matt seem to get on very well, so it's quite easy to have those open and honest conversations. But like you say, throughout the whole process, how important it is to have that good relationship. Did you, during this time, you obviously had the injury, did you use this opportunity to look at other injuries you had? I know previously you mentioned you had some other injuries. Did you think of working on other areas of maybe getting technically as well? Was it an opportunity to do that, or was it solely focused on the knee, nothing else matters?
So about 5 months earlier, I'd ruptured an ATFL on the other ankle. So the balance work initially was quite entertaining, because on one side I had a horrendously dodgy knee, and then on the other side I had a pretty poor ankle stability. So all BOSU work and all proprioception work was basically working both sides, which was pretty beneficial, because on the ankle side of things, although the rehab was thorough, there was still a lot of work that probably needed doing on that side of things. So from there, it was basically that side. I was basically attacking both sides on the legs, and then upper body, I've basically not managed to do a lot due to previous injuries as well. So for me, it was a real opportunity to put some weight on. And over the course of the 6-7 months that I was in intensive rehab on that side of things in the gym, I think I put on 3 or 4 kilos. So there was a real opportunity that we did take, which again is thanks to the programming done by Matt and Roy, Soph and Stretch, like on that side of things, which is actually really beneficial.
Yeah, because that helped with your injecting as well, didn't it? Was it like injecting and aerials as part of the game, as part of your game, was a bit of a target towards end stage, wasn't it? Once you could, we really kind of allowed you to work on that in the gym. From a performance perspective.
Yeah. And then, so after that 6 weeks or so gym work, you touched upon it earlier, then it's moving to running. So finally probably go outside and do something else. So yeah, just Matt, do you want to give an overview just from that next sort of 6 weeks, and we can take some sort of touch points from there?
So I guess it's always a little bit nervous as a physio when you really start to push people on and you're changing to a new stimulus. So the main thing obviously is trying to reduce the risk of anything going wrong with that. So when we're looking at that, we like Brendan said, we use the ISOK machine quite a lot. So that just gives us some good strength diagnostics around quads and hamstrings. So it gives a little bit of reassurance that he can produce force through there. And then we also, like I said, we use the force text quite a lot as well. So looking at calf strength and looking at max isometric strength as well. So like a 30-degree push through the quads. So again, it just gives us a force diagnostics basically. Like, okay, he can produce this much force, and we know we're roughly going to get this from running. So we can say, okay, he's actually strong enough to be able to run, which is really important. So once we kind of got that baseline data, we start to plan, basically returning him back to running really. So it usually always starts with some plyometric work, so like double leg jumping and that sort of stuff. And then that feeds in then again to looking at the jump data we get from the force decks as well. So we always do like a counter movement jump and a drop jump. And again, we can relate that to the forces going with running as well. So we know if we can do a drop jump, but again, we're pretty happy that he's going to be able to tolerate the ground reaction force through running. So once we're happy with all that, we look at doing things like running drills, so like A skips and B skips, and then that just inevitably then feeds into just linear running. So we always start linear first, minimum stress as possible, the ACL, really limit the amount of turning he does on it. So we're going to avoiding any kind of quick stimulus where he's got to twist and turn on it for that initial period. And probably a 2 or 3 week period of that, of just building up the volume of that, I would say. And then also in that time, the gym also really pushes on as well. So, we continue to push strength in the gym, and also we're getting a new stimulus from the running. So we're looking for any reaction. The main things we're looking at with that are really maintaining a quiet knee. So we don't want any swelling on there at all. And make sure, he's not getting any kind of loss of range movement or anything along those lines afterwards, which is never a smooth process. It's never a linear process. I think always when you push things along, there's always like 4 steps forward, 2 steps back. One of the challenges we had with Brendan right from the beginning was trying to get the knee completely settled from a swelling point of view. And that took a long time. And, once we returned back to running, it never really got any worse, but it kind of didn't resolve completely. So we're always a little bit conscious of that, because obviously you've got swelling on the knee. You're always potentially going to have influence on knee stability. So that was a big target for us before we wanted to push on to change the direction tasks. And
it's quite an interesting point you mentioned there in terms of, it's not always just a sort of straight curve from one stage to the next. And Brendan, you mentioned earlier in terms of like knowing your own body. So there's a sort of 3 factors in play here. There's, I think, the knowing your own body from the athlete. You've got the data that's suggesting where you're at, and then you've got the physios installing confidence and trusting to actually you can go and pushing them forward to do new exercises and stuff. So Brendan, was there any times that you thought your body was in a better place there, maybe the data was showing, or vice versa, or And how did you kind of deal with that with the physios?
So we actually had it drained at one stage during the process, didn't we? We had to get rid of the swelling. I didn't really think it was much, but obviously these guys know the clinical side of it a lot more than I do. So I was like, yeah, let's crack on. There were 2 times that I thought I'd ripped my hamstring during the whole process. There was one running and one bouldering where I was a bit nervous, but all that happened was the hamstring tissue was just pulling away from the scar tissue from where the graft had been taken in my hamstring. So from that point of view, that was a case of I was in full panic, and Matt was one of the calmest blokes in the world. And he'd be like, yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. We'll be fine. I came in and naturally everything was fine. The scores, I think we had like 1 or 2 days where it was a little bit quiet afterwards in terms of the amount of workload we did. And then once it settled again, we just cracked on. And any time that I didn't feel it felt great, we had the discussions as a athlete and physio and S&C as well. There was a lot of time where there was the 3 of us, not just 2 of us, which was great because so if you're feeling great, we can push it a little bit. And if not, actually, well, let's not worry about that, because if we actually look after it now in the long run, so the day after, maybe the 2 days after, actually it might feel better that you can then push and you don't really lose any of what you think you're gaining. You might just gain it on a different day. So I think there was obviously daily discussion when we were in Bisham and kind of having those conversations face to face, and equally when we went into lockdown, there was still that conversation over WhatsApp and a lot of video calls between the 3 of us, kind of just making sure we're keeping on top of everything on that side of things. So it was a lot of open discussion where if I wasn't feeling great, I'd be very comfortable saying it. No matter what form it came out in, there was definitely a conversation of how I'm feeling basically every day. And likewise from those guys, like if they weren't happy with something, they would tell me quite openly. Like if it didn't look right or it looked a bit uncomfortable or a bit awkward, they would tell me. So there was a lot of conversation about extending my knee in walking phase and in jogging and everything else. From their point of view, there wasn't enough straightening of the knee. It was constantly staying in a flex mode. So there was a lot of chat about that side of things, which was frustrating as an athlete, but at the same time, I'm not going to argue with them because they know exactly what they're talking about. So I've just got to try and do it. It was just difficult to do.
And definitely, and I suppose for you guys, it always comes back to your objectives are both the same, isn't it? To try and get you back returning to play as quickly and safely as possible. I think the friction, like you say, comes from the panic, you say, the emotion side of it, and the external factors of Olympics or pressure from athletes or coaches or whatever that can kind of sort of become a friction to it all. I'm quite interested. You mentioned bouldering, which obviously is nothing to do with hockey, I can imagine. Do you just want to explain how that came about and how that was included into the rehab?
I wouldn't exactly say it was included into the rehab. Yeah. I guess it was a great mental relief for myself as an athlete, doing something every day or 4 days a week where you kind of, everything's intense, everything's stressful, everything's critiqued, and it's a really intense atmosphere. To then go and do, for example, bouldering was great fun because the atmosphere at a bouldering hall is completely different. It's someone will see that you're struggling with a problem and they'll actually offer some help and guidance and kind of on that side of things. But what we didn't realize initially was how stressful it is upon the body, which was actually great because then we started using it as a training stimulus, not just as a mental relief. So myself and 1 or 2 other members of the squad kind of just went down to the local bouldering wall and basically cracked on from there. And then I had a conversation with Matt just one day in Bisham and basically said, I went bouldering. And that's how we basically understood. So there was a bit of more understanding of there was quite a lot of bouldering tasks eventually upper body stuff started being put in the program, which was a lot of fun as well, because it's just something different that wouldn't normally be put into a textbook program, but there's a different stimulus. So not just a training stimulus, but there's also a mindset stimulus. So you're keeping things interesting, keeping things fresh, that as an athlete makes a huge difference during the rehab process, rather than doing the same exercises each day. There was a real effort put in by Matt and Roy to really change up. So we're hitting the same principles, we're hitting the same muscles, we're hitting the same group, same movements, but in a different form. And that's a really big thing for myself as an athlete. And I'm sure for them, it was probably quite interesting just trying to work out how they could hit different muscles in different groups with different exercises.
Yes. Yeah, so Matt, when Brendan came to you and said he's been doing some bouldering, what was your initial reaction? And it sounds like you embraced it. And yeah, what were your initial reactions, and why did you then embrace it and go along with it?
Yeah, so I mean, by that stage, we were kind of quite a long way along the rehab path where we were fairly happy from a knee strength and stability point of view that it wasn't going to be a massive risk. But my first impression was, what the hell are you doing? To be completely honest. Just had visions of him falling off a boulder halfway up and landing on his knee on a soft mat, and I was like, oh god, this is like disaster waiting to happen. But once we kind of like, all right, what are you actually doing there? You know, the routes were really easy. It was all really controlled. We kind of put some rules in place that he wasn't going to do anything ridiculous where he was going to really push himself and fall on his knee or anything like that. So I was happy from that point of view. And then we were kind of, as that kind of went along over the next few weeks, it turned out actually to be a really nice different stimulus in terms of challenging the knee. So, you know, you're getting some really funky positions. So it's getting rotation through the knee, using the hamstring a lot. So it really exposed actually how weak the hamstring was in different positions. So that was quite nice as well. So yeah, I think in hindsight, it's actually turned out to be a really good thing. I don't think it's particularly recommended necessarily, but I think we did it in a safe enough way that we were fairly happy about it because we put enough rules in place. But yeah, it was an interesting addition to the rehab we were doing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it wasn't like so I didn't start during the rehab process. I'd started previously before I got the injury. So it wasn't like I was just, I'll just go and try it. It was a question to Matt during the process of when do you think I'll be able to go back and do it? So it wasn't just randomly willy-nilly attack it. It was, yeah, let's make sure this is actually quite safe.
Yeah, definitely. And so, I mean, it sounds great to embrace change and to do these things and the positive impact it has on the athlete. And embracing change brings us to the next part, which is when I think you were close to the sort of end of the rehab program. Don't know if you know that there was a coronavirus and a national lockdown. So that's a change I don't think anybody really saw coming. So when that lockdown hit, I think from the sort of schedule I've got here, you were sort of close to the end of the sort of rehab cycle, looking to come back to return to play. How did the whole pandemic affect your schedule?
So the games were still on at that stage. So we were still attacking everything. So I was doing a lot of road running, a lot of change of direction work. Luckily had a pretty exceptional gym space that I could still use, located in the house that I was staying in during lockdown. So I was pretty lucky on that side of things that I still had access to a bar, weights, dumbbells. We had a K box as well. And I had a lot of boxes as well for box jumps and things like that. So I was pretty lucky on that side of things that I still had a lot of equipment there. And so whilst basically when lockdown happened, I went from obviously going into Bisham to doing a lot of training on my own, but then a lot of sort of calls. So the sessions that I was doing in terms of change of direction were normally video calls with Matt and Roy and Sophie as well, just to basically check in, just to make sure I wasn't doing anything irrational or anything stupid in terms of movement. It was all making sure it's controlled in the right way of doing everything. So from that point of view, I think we dealt with it really well. I guess the issue was when the games got cancelled, I lost a lot of motivation as an athlete myself. And I think that was probably when it was harder for Matt and Roy to actually try and get me to do stuff, and kind of that side of things. I just simply lost interest, which is natural when you lose a goal or a goal's not really achievable. So there was about a 3-week period where I think I was pretty much uncontactable. just because I just didn't really want anything to do with rehab, because I think I was a combination of tired and fed up, which is obviously a very bizarre way to look at a COVID outbreak and everything else, but that strictly from a selfish athlete point of view, that's what happened in my motivation.
Yeah, and I think you touched upon the sort of goal setting and definitely the motivation. So was that coincide around the time of Olympics was postponed? Was that around the same sort of time? So what you thought, oh, Olympics coming, everything's quite uncertain, and like you say, it's a bit fed up, and what are we sort of aiming for? We don't even know when our next game is, and it's stuck indoors and no one knew what was going on. So Matthew, do you think from the sort of medical team, did they how did you guys adapt through that and try keep the players motivated, or and adapt with the old processes? Because I could imagine you're used to people coming in every day. So how did you sort of adapt through that?
Totally new environment and a new challenge for sure. So we basically, when we knew we were going to go into lockdown, we kind of like, okay, what does Brendan need at home? Like I say, he's actually quite lucky because he had a pretty decent gym setup anyway. But we thought one of the main things he needs to keep on with is kind of eccentric strength, and kind of how we're going to target that in a home environment. So like I say, we got him a K box, which allowed us to keep kind of targeting those gym goals really. And then, like I say, that really coincided with us returning him to change of direction, sort of pitch tasks. So yeah, I mean, it's again, like I mentioned earlier about, it's always quite stressful giving the player new stimulus, but then to doing that and doing it remotely was fairly stressful. So lots of video calls of him in his garden jumping around. And then, yeah, we basically setting up video calls, him on a, I think it was like the local cricket pitch. So we send him a program, he'd set up the cones, and then he'd go off and do it. And I remember, I think it was one of the first or second ones he did. He basically put the camera in his car boot, looking out on the cricket pitch. And he's like, "Is this good?" It's like, "Yeah, it's good, it's good." And then he ran off, and I'm not joking, it was about this big in the distance. It's like, it's completely pointless. And he came back after the first set. So it's good. Yeah, it's good, mate. Keep going. But completely pointless from our point of view. So it was a little bit hard work to try and keep on top of it, but I think we did pretty well. Like I said, just being really structured with what he'd sent him, and we knew what we sent him, if he covers this content, we know it's going to lead to this. So we had a kind of end goal in sight. But like Brendan said, once the Olympics got cancelled, he like I say, said himself, he kind of probably checked out a little bit for probably 3 or 4 weeks. So he kind of, we were doing little bits, but not really pushing on through that period, I would say. So it was. I think everyone was in a similar boat, to be honest. I think it's probably one of the reflections I would have on that is like, you know, could we have done more to support him in that time from a medical point of view? I mean, we kept in touch, but it's kind of like, okay, you know, you've checked out a little bit here, but do we need to do more to help you through that? Or I get the sense that it was fairly happy to kind of check out and just leave things for the time being. And then, to be fair, you did contact us after the 2 or 3 weeks and said, okay, I'm kind of ready now to get back going into it. So I think you maybe needed that little bit of downtime yourself as well.
Yeah, I massively respected that personally as an athlete. I think there's times to be hands-on, and there's also times to give a bit of space. And I think given what had gone on over the course of the last 6-7 months and this, I think it was the right decision for me as well as an athlete, because I think if I'm not internally driven, as an athlete, I think you're going to be fighting a losing battle. So I think knowledge of the athlete and everything else, I think it was the right combination to kind of go, do you know what, he needs a bit of space. Whether or not he meant it, I think he did. So from that point of view, I massively respected it, which is why, as Matt said, I checked out, but then I also checked back in.
Yeah, you did.
Because we got to the stage that it was like, do you know what, we need to ramp stuff up again if I'm going to be good to go come August, September. So from that point of view, I think it was really good from them, and kind of there's a hands-on, hands-off approach, and I think it was the right decision to go hands-off. And when I was ready to come back in, that's when we went at it again, which was, I think, really good, because it just gave me a bit of time to recharge and reset and go again.
And I can imagine from the medical perspective of that as well is once you've said I'm back in, it's a lot easier because you've I suppose incited that motivation to start again. It hasn't come from you have to do this. It's I want to do this. What do you think actually changed then? So you had 2-3 weeks where you checked out. What was the thing that kind of made you go, I want to get back in and get cracking again?
I think a combination of just recharging. I don't think I realized how much the 5 months had taken out of me emotionally. I think because I was so driven by a goal that I didn't really take any effect. I think if I'd have gone through all the way through past the Olympics, I think it would have been a longer checkout afterwards. Mm-hmm. But I think I knew that there was come September, I knew I wanted to be back playing. I didn't really want to waste any time. So I didn't want to miss any basically start of the season. I wanted to get a full season under my belt before the next game. So I think on that side of things, we targeted almost like a timeline of we're going to need this amount of time to get back in. And I'm still, bear in mind, I still haven't played hockey at this stage. There was a real thought between myself and Matt and Roy that we need to get stuff under the belt first before we attack the game. So we were so I think I just wanted, as you say, I kind of just wanted to get back into it. At the end of the day, it's something I love. It's just something I haven't played for a while. So there was a bit of apprehension around that as well. So, but at the same time, there was also that real care and consideration from Matt, Roy and Soph and Stretch just to make sure that I was ready to go when I needed to be. And so we had a different, instead of being obviously the games being, or the 4 matches before selection being the goal, now it was a case of first league game of the season was the goal, right? Let's work out what we've got. So there was a lot of conversation between myself and my club coach as well, who was fantastic in accommodating that. And there was a lot of relaying messages and making sure nothing was misconstrued, which again, there wasn't, which is great because there was clarity from both camps, which was pretty ideal. So from an athlete point of view, there was no stress on me. It was just a case of conversations needed to be had, and they were had.
Brilliant. And then, so you touched there on the goal setting. On you set a new goal, and one of the goals was now with the postponement not achievable. How important is it for you as an athlete to have goals? And do you, throughout this whole process, were they quite short term? Was it week by week? Was it month by month? Or was it like the end goal of Olympics?
We set a lot of strength goals were set throughout the whole process, and they were conquered daily, weekly, monthly. Like they were constantly being reset, and it wasn't a case of Roy or the S&C guys choosing when the goals were, what the goals were. It was a case of me setting them as well. So there was a lot of ownership on myself as well as staff, which was great because then it's a joint venture, and it makes it one, more enjoyable, but two, also means it's mine, if that makes sense. So there's a bit more ownership on me to really, I've said it, so I'm not going to let myself down here from that point of view. And with the physio side of things, the goals again were clinically set goals, so they weren't there to be messed around with. And if they weren't achieved, all right, well, we'll go back and we'll attack it, and we will achieve it. It's just might take a little bit longer, and that was understood by all camps, myself, S&C and physio. So again, it was quite easy to kind of follow the program, to be honest with you, because it was quite simple, and we kept it as concise and simple as possible. I don't know, that's from an athlete point of view. I don't know if Matt has any other opinions on it.
No, yeah, I'd say, yeah, there's short, medium, long-term goals we used. A lot of strength goals. So, in order to push on to the next stage of rehab, we generally use like criteria-based markers. So that's got to be, whatever that looks like in terms of a strength goal or whatever. So, I think, it's important to have those short-term goals, but, it's bigger picture as well. We were working towards the Olympics, and we knew that if we didn't play in this game on this date, we weren't going to make selection. But it's putting all the pieces in place to be able to get you in that place initially. So, just a mixture of medium, short and long-term goals, really important, I would say.
Perfect. And so now we've got past the rehab program, looking at return to play. I think one of your quotes that you've done, Brendan, was I'll read it for you guys. Was 330 days later, 327 days of moaning, and 150 days of being stuck exercising indoors and finally let loose. It'd be interesting to know what you're like on those 3 days you weren't moaning. Tell the viewers and stuff, when was that first moment of being able to play, and what did that feel like?
I guess it's just pure excitement. There's obviously a bit of nerves around trusting your knee, and kind of there's that psychological barrier of, is it going to happen again? But thankfully, I didn't really have that. Along with the work from the EIS, so the sports psychologists and the physio and S&C guys, they basically just filled me with confidence the whole way through the process. We hit the numbers which they knew would clinically mean I'd be absolutely fine. And kind of once that whistle goes and once you're back playing, that's it. You're immersed. And I guess that's the beauty of it from an athlete point of view, is I never really had to worry about my knee in games. I've not had that worry. Hamstrings, not really been an issue at all, apart from the 2 times where I thought it might have happened during the rehab process, but it was absolutely fine. I've not really had anything that's made me nervous about it. So I guess I've been really lucky in comparison to other people who have had more issues. So yeah, I guess it's just pure excitement. You're just doing something that you love again without having to worry about anything. Yeah, there's a few scars, but you get scars from anything. So from that point of view, I was kind of just excited and ready, and kind of, we just made sure that it was safe. And that was the most important bit from my point of view, and from the S&C guys' point of view as well, and physio point of view as well.
And Matt, so when Brendan took the pitch again after the injury, what do you guys do as a medical team to help him get into the best place possible? I know Brendan mentioned a few about the sort of clinical side of things, but is there anything that you guys specifically do to really help the athlete along for their first game back?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing I would say is having a good rehab content building up to that. So by the time he's actually gone back to that first game, he's done enough in training, and he's had enough exposure on the pitch to feel really confident. So we use like subjective questionnaires for that sometimes, just to give an idea of his confidence around the knee. I remember when we did the first one, actually, it was surprisingly good, and I was like, okay, we've done an okay job here. I think that's a really big mark. If the player's generally confident on it, I take a lot of trust in that, especially if we've got all the strength data and all that other stuff we normally use to back that up. So I think it's that like I say, the main thing is having enough exposure to all the things we know it's going to be a risk. So with Brendan's injury and his surgery, he had a hamstring graft. So we look at what we did do. We looked at his GPS data, so we know, okay, so a normal training session will cover X amount of high speed running, and it'll cover this much volume of low speed running. It'll have roughly this many acceleration, decelerations. So we can work backwards from that in those previous weeks and really expose him to that. So we know when he's going back into that first session, okay, it's going to be roughly 30 minutes. It's going to roughly look like this, but already over the past 3 weeks, you've done like triple that. So that, I think, again, just gives him, and more importantly, gives me confidence that he's not going to re-rupture when he goes back on the pitch. And then it's kind of building back up to a similar sort of process then when we're looking to build back up to that first game as well. So we've got loads of international GPS data on Brendan specifically. And we know, like, it's quite an interesting one because I think his amount of high speed running in a game is something like 20 meters. So I don't know if that's Brendan's position or his playing style, but we know from with hockey, we do the live subs, rolling subs. So we're in a game now and then it'll have a full on 50 or 60 meter sprint. So that's for us, we can identify that and say, okay, that's a risk on his hamstring. We know he's coming back from that. So we need to make sure he's got enough exposure for that going back. So that's just quite a nice example, just we use to minimize that risk as much as we can. And
then on that, so you've been through the journey with Brendan for the whole time as well. On an emotional level, what do you guys feel is in? Are you nervous? Are you excited? Just overjoyed he's back, or do you try remove emotion completely and just sort of stay quite focused on the role, really?
And do you mean when he's returning back to play?
Yeah.
It's probably, I wouldn't say nervous, just because of all the stuff we've put in place beforehand. So we're pretty confident that he's in a good place. I'd say it's a bit of relief. I'd say we've got him back on the pitch. And I guess also a little bit proud of kind of the process we've gone through, and just really satisfying from my point of view to get Brendan back and see him play, and especially when you get feedback from the coaches and the other players saying he looks pretty good, he's not been back that long. You're like, okay, that's really satisfying. So yeah, that's probably my point of view on it.
And probably happy that Brendan's not in your physio room every single day as well.
You know what? He's a good person to have around in the physio room. So, but yeah, happy not even in rehab, but
yeah. Perfect. So I think we'll leave that journey there in terms of the road to recovery for you, Brendan. I've got a couple of just quick fire questions that I'll fire to both of you if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Brendan, from yourself, what advice would you give to anybody who's got a long-term injury, whether that's work in a professional sporting environment or an amateur athlete? What would you say is the one big bit of advice for them to get through that?
I'd probably just say it's a real opportunity to know your body if you don't already. And just make sure that whilst you're going through the rehab or recovery side of things, it's really listen to your body as well. So if it feels good, you can probably push it. And if it doesn't, don't worry about it, because it won't be a day lost. It'd just be a case of it might just take a little bit. It might take a little bit longer, but that's not a day lost. That's a day to rebuild. So for me, I guess that's probably the big thing, is kind of listen to your body and really do get in tune with it, because it's only going to benefit you in the long run, especially if you want to be playing sports later down the line with your own kids or grandkids. It's only going to benefit you.
Definitely. And Matthew, from the medical perspective, what advice would you give to sort of therapists for people who are treating long-term injuries?
I think the main thing is probably don't try to speed up nature. I think with a lot of injuries, we try to get things back quicker than sometimes the healing process allows. So I think that's probably the main thing. Certainly with ACLs, I think that's really important for that initial period, just to allow the knee to settle down. And then also just looking at giving yourself as much data as you can to give yourself confidence to reduce any element of risk when they do go back. It's probably the main thing I would say.
Perfect. And what was the most important factor to you, Brendan, from the support of family, friends, and the medical team?
I guess consistency. From a selfish point of view, it makes a huge difference as for an athlete if the people around you kind of are there, and they're not there and not there, they're just there. So Matt and Roy being the same people that they are day in, day out makes a huge difference for myself, because it means you naturally just create a relationship with people from that point of view. So I wouldn't say I knew Matt that well prior to the process, but I'd say after the amount of quizzes that I probably tried to put up in that room, just having general conversations, learning that Matt, for example, goes to Glastonbury quite a lot, like information like that kind of thing is, although it sounds quite trivial, is quite important, because you're just starting to build relationships. Same with Roy, our S&C guys. Although he's not the loudest person in the world, what he does give you is consistency, so you can work off that. Same with families and friends and things like that. It's just always just being consistent people, just being yourselves, not worrying about how you're acting around another person. Like, I wouldn't say Matt changed across the process, whether I was ready to be when I came in from the initial surgery, for example, or prior to the surgery to where I was playing again. There was no inconsistency. There was no, oh, am I treading on eggshells? It was just him. And that, for me as an athlete, just means I can work around really well and create relationships from that point of view.
Yeah, brilliant. I think, you definitely touched upon the inter sort of personal skills and the relationship, like you say, with the Glastonbury stuff. There's just micro conversations that you have, which I can imagine through lockdown and stuff is harder to get, because you tend to have a Zoom call and discuss the topic on hand, rather than you're in the physio room just having a little chat. And so yeah, it's a really good point. And so another one for you, Matthew. what advice would you give a young professional sports therapist or physiotherapist who wants to work in professional sport? What advice would you give them to help fulfill their dreams?
Yeah, it's obviously like it's always a quite difficult environment to get into. I mean, I when I first kind of decided I really want to work in sport, I ended up doing loads of volunteering work. So with a local basketball club, I did a bit with like England touch rugby. So just trying to build up your CV as much as you can with as much sport exposure as possible. And then, yeah, it is then just basically trying to apply for jobs, and probably don't give up. That's probably the main thing. I've applied for so many jobs in sport that, I've not even got an interview for. But it is just perseverance, I would say, and just building up your CV as much as you can to help support your applications.
Perfect. And final question, Brendan, what advice would you give to a young athlete who wants to become a professional hockey player?
Oof, Jesus. I guess just enjoy the journey. Don't focus on the outset, on the outcome of it all. Just kind of enjoy what you're doing day in, day out, and take the little wins, rather than focusing on just the big picture all the time. Sometimes the small picture is also really nice to enjoy.
Yeah, that's nice to put. I like that. Perfect. Yeah, thanks, guys.